Hello everyone, I'm Somdatta Karak and I welcome you to CCMB Conversations. This is our space to discuss with experts and understand how science and technology are shaping up in India. Today we have with us Sindhu Radhakrishna, Professor of Behavioral Ecology at National Institute of Advanced Studies at Bengaluru. She studies human-primate conflicts, roles of humans and primates as well as ecology in driving conflicts. But instead of calling it conflicts, she looks at these from a behavioral lens. This is what we are trying to unpack today in the conversation. Welcome, Sindhu.
Thank you.
Sindhu, tell us what drives you to understand the relationship between humans and primates. I do not call it conflicts because I know that you don't like that.
Yeah, technically the term is human-wildlife interactions, or HWI. It's a fairly broad and well-established area of work. And this particular area of work looks at what kind of interactions develop between us and other living beings. And I'm fascinated with trying to understand this, simply because I think that these relationships, if you let them not be circumscribed by certain definitions, let us understand ourselves a lot better. By putting categories to it like conflict or even coexistence, I think we sort of circumscribe the range and scope of these entire set of interactions. And what I like to do through my work, or I try to do through my work, is to try and explore the entire gamut of what happens here. In wildlife, I'm particularly fond of primates, both by accident and by a personal inclination, and they are a model system that I've chosen to look at for much of my career.
Got it. So tell us a little bit more on how you do these studies. How do you study these interactions? How many primates are you looking at? Are you looking at all primates in India?
No. When I actually began looking at the social behavior of a nocturnal primate called the slender loris. That's what I did my PhD on, and that's what began my interest in primates. When I began studying the loris, I was primarily interested in understanding what are social systems, how do they evolve, what can a little nocturnal monkey tell us about that, and that's where the whole story began. But over the years, and then I started looking at a related species called roe loris, and then conservation became more important. And over time, somehow very organically, it slipped into trying and understanding what kind of actions do we have with them, how does it affect us, affect them. To begin, when I began, I really was trying to understand them through the lens of conservation, through the lens of conflict, because it seemed to be a very important way in which we try and, both try to protect the species, as well as try and see how we mitigate issues which are becoming problematic. But through that, over time, I have come to realize that that is a very simplistic way of trying to understand it. And my own interest in areas like literature and history tried to sort of led me to pick up other ways in which we explore these dimensions. For example, I'm very keen about Tamil Sangam literature, it's a body of poetry that goes back to more than 2000 years old. I was introduced to this by my colleague and a person who really sort of encouraged me to go on this route, Professor Aditya Sinha. And from then it's been a journey of discovery, because really literature lets us see without any bias that there were people before us who saw, observed and appreciated these animals, and that reflects in the kind of poetry, the kind of literature they wrote. And Tamil Sangam poetry is beautiful in the way, there are descriptions of various species, not only monkeys, but the more I became familiar with them, the more it struck me that I can use literature to actually chart the way our relations with them have changed over time. And that is one way I try to do that. I try to look at it to understand what does it tell us about what we knew then, what do we know now, how have our relationships with them changed, how have our attitudes towards them changed. And one of the studies I did try to do precisely that, it charted this over time. The other way you look at it is also to look at historical chronicles. For example, authors like Jahangir, for example, have written enormously about this. There have been other travelogues, writers who have written about the species that they saw. There are very interesting descriptions about primates in India by Greek travelers, from ages ago, and this sort of gives us a glimpse of an era and a time and the kind of relationship that existed then, and then you stand back and look at where we are now, and sometimes it's very, very sad. Coming to contemporary times, I talked about human dimensions of wildlife, and this is a very rather well-established area of work where people try to understand how conflict relations, for example, are also shaped, mediated by human attitudes towards wildlife. Not only with respect to primates, but I sort of adopt that to look at primates. And when I do that currently, for example, if I want to try and understand conflict that occur over crop breeding instances, then I use what are called techniques or strategies or methods that you take from the social science, which are interviews or which are questionnaire surveys, and then you of course group discussions, and then you use these kinds of methods to try and ask people to understand from them what their perspectives of living with primates are. Human dimensions of wildlife not only try to understand what humans as a group think and understand about primates, it also engages with how different groups of humans think very differently about them. Like for example, one of the studies we did was to try and understand how the forest department and levels of personnel within the forest department, management levels within the forest department, have very different perspectives of conflict, the mitigation measures that are in place, and why that in turn affects the way those methods are operationalized in the field. How their attitudes and perspectives are very different from what farmers' attitudes and perspectives are, and we ourselves as academics or conservationists or environmentalists or simply just primatologists, how our attitudes, perspectives are also very different. So as part of that work, I also try to engage with how primatologists as academics or as environmentalists also bring their own set of biases to the work we do, and why this affects the kind of work we do and our relationships with primates itself.
So that makes me really intrigued about the changes in the relationships between humans and primates. I mean, you mentioned that across years in history, that relationship has changed. Can you please elaborate on that?
So you look at older pieces of literature, there is a sense of indulgence in them towards monkeys. As I was talking today about crop raiding is nothing very new.
What is crop raiding?
Crop raiding, sorry, I should talk about that first. Crop raiding basically is actually a term that a lot of primatologists don't like to use these days because it refers to the act of animals predating or entering crop fields and damaging crops. They eat some of it, they destroy a lot of it. So the term raiding is because humans see it as primates robbing their food, right? So more recently, primatologists have tried to push for the use of another word, and in fact a lot of studies do use the word crop foraging or crop feeding, because from the point of view or the perspective of the primate, it's just feeding a kind of a source. And they say that the use of particular term also kind of labels the act that the primate is doing, and therefore creates a kind of a very discriminatory perspective as the primate. So primatologists now try to use another kind of term for it. I do agree with it, yet I still continue to use the term, but I sort of use it when I'm talking about conflict.
Ritu, can we move to the room somehow? Yeah. Is it necessary that this and this to happen in the same room?
I continue to use the term crop raiding because the way I look at it, yes, when I talk about crop raiding from the view of perspective of the primate, then yes, it's crop foraging or crop feeding. But from perspective of the farmer, it's still crop raiding.
Correct.
And I try to balance, I try to consciously balance what I think is fair to a primate as well as to the farmer. And therefore I respond to reviewers saying that, it is nice to not categorize or not label, but one must also be cognizant of what this means to the livelihood of the farmer. And therefore, yes. And again, you can label it any which way you want for a scientific journal which is written in a language that will never be accessed by the farmer, right? So rural farmers in India will still continue to think of it as reading in their own vernacular languages, and that doesn't change just because I'm writing something differently. And I would like to acknowledge that and respect that also, because they are suffering. Conservation is important, but we must also be respectful of the fact that somebody is suffering. I'm not suffering. So, I can go out there and say it's crop feeding, it's crop foraging from the pure perspective of the farmer. But do I really have the right to take away that sense of suffering that the farmer has? No, I don't think so. And therefore, I'm very conscious of that particular aspect. I do respond to viewers that way also when I write about it. So that is a kind of a stance I try to take. So as I was saying, if you go back to ages ago, there is a sense of indulgence that the farmer has. There's a very beautiful piece of poetry in Tamil Sangam literature which talks about young girls splashing in a tank of water and green-eyed monkeys pick up the grain and float away. And there is so much indulgence in it. There are so many descriptions of monkeys holding on the young ones to their chest as they jump across, monkeys that raid, like bandits do. There is this very clear understanding that monkeys lived right next to them. They talk about monkeys in their backyard. And there is also the sense that this is acceptable. There is no anger there is no resentment there is only joy there. And even when they are talking about monkeys as foolish creatures, there is the indulgence of a parent talking about a child. If you go down some years after that, you sort of get the feel that this whole business of the sacredness or the sacredization of the monkey begins. I've hypothesized that this is primarily a later day phenomenon, and the Ramayana, the popularity of the Ramayana did play a huge role in it. And it also, I think it began when temples started being built in forest areas. People started sitting temples and then would see monkeys in their surroundings, and therefore this association of the monkey with the sacredness became, I think it begins there, and after Ramayana hugely added on to it. Today, if you look at it, somewhere as we go past and you look at different pieces of literature, you see that the attitude of the writers has changed. And you kind of argue that this could be a personal writer's bias as well, but I do think it represents a more generalized view of the public as well, that there is a separation now. And this, I think, is also a consequence of urbanization. We no longer see and live with monkeys in a backyard. That has come down a great deal, right? That has reduced a great deal. And because of that, you're only seeing them in specific surroundings, and because of that, you sort of associate particular geographies with them, unlike earlier times when it's more seamless. And because of all of those, you now have two different kinds of monkeys. You have a forest monkey, then you have a monkey that's associated with sacredness, and then from then on we move to a monkey that is ingressing in human spaces. There is a forest space and a human space, and these are two separate areas. And now the movement of the monkey from the forest into the human space is seen as an ingress. It's not seamless anymore. And therefore now when the monkey takes away food, it is seen as stealing or robbing, because this is a clear demarcated space that the monkey should not be entering. There is that kind of feel get through it. And this, I think, is the base of why it's become raiding, and there is resentment against it. But although it is there, even today, when conflict rates are fairly high, and in many areas of India, farmers' livelihoods are really decimated because of this. It is a huge devastation to lose so much of your crops to it. It still happens that farmers, when asked to talk about their problems, usually complain or are resentful about government responses to their problems. Very rarely does the monkey come up as a main issue.
I see.
And this is not even specific to primates, it even with respect to elephant conflict. People have worked on it, have constantly talked about the fact that when you go down and talk to the regular farmer who is affected by all of this, there is still a great sense of affection for the species. What they are resentful about is the sense of powerlessness that they experience when they are not able to act against it. Nobody else is acting on their favor. So the resentment is usually against what they think is the forest department's job to do this, to protect me, not doing it well enough, or the government has not done anything about this. Very rarely do they actually point out hands towards a monkey species and say, this is a problematic creature, take this away, you know.
Yeah.
Take away is that, I mean, these are not, it's never a black and white world, always grays, and people typically want the problem to go away, which is why translocation as a solution to mitigation is so popular. They don't want to deal with the problem themselves. So move it away. Just move it away. You know, I don't want even this monkey to be hurt. Just take it away. I just don't want to live with it anymore. And that's where we are today.
Right. So there, from literature, I will now move to economics. So, because money makes sense to people much more tangibly and easily. So, what is the cost-benefit analysis of humans and primates living together? How much damage happens? How much? What goodness comes about?
That's a really tough question to answer because the costs are always tangible, the benefits are always very tangible. So how do you really value it? People have always tried to put a number to it, and this number is difficult simply because even when you ask people to rate how much damage have you experienced to monkeys, the numbers vary so much. They are not, I don't think it's really possible to put a tally to it because monkeys are not the only ones damaging crops, right? There are pests, there's drought, there's natural phenomena, and you can have n number of factors which affect crop productivity. Apart from that, monkeys are also not the only species that raid crops. You can have other species also which do, wild pigs, nilgai, birds, you know, you can have any of them that do that too. So actually it is very difficult for a farmer. In fact, I would say it's impossible for any farmer to actually sit down and say this much damage is only what was caused by monkeys. No, everyone is just broadly estimating stuff. And when they do that, they usually give you numbers like 30% of my crop to 70% of my crop was lost. I think these numbers should be taken with big fistfuls of salt. I'm not saying any of this derides or negates the fact that they are suffering. I think they are. But it's also the fact that primates tend to get blamed for damages that other animals cause as well.
But probably what the farmers are saying that get rid of all the wildlife causing damage?
Primates are most visible. They raid during the day, they come in groups, because of which much of the thing gets added onto them. Two, the bigger issue is that primates are extremely adaptable. You can put, and people have tried various kinds of mitigation measures. Primates adapt very quickly to most of them, right? All of them, in fact. Fences, bioacoustics, other biorepellents. People have tried many kinds of things, and primates adapt really quickly to them. So it's like an ongoing everyday battle that happens, which is why farmers go back to traditional guarding mechanisms and stuff. But again, in our experience, as well as experience of other researchers across Africa, farmers are also inhibited from trying techniques. They prefer their own traditionals. You can show them other techniques that work, which are not cost intensive, which are also not very labor intensive, and yet they are not very comfortable switching to it. So there are techniques, low cost techniques that you can try, some kind of fences that you try, but they must be at it and they must be consistent at it, and somehow they never seem to have enough faith in it. It could be because we as researchers are coming in for a very short time into their lives. Why should they have any faith or belief in what we are suggesting versus what they have tried for years to come?
Correct.
And often the real problem is that they want their voices to be heard. They want the forest department to listen to them and tell them, yes, we will try and sort this out. Typically, forest department is also very busy people. It's very difficult for the government also to spend the time of attention and time that they need to do that. In areas where individual foresters have tried it, it has been successful. So yes, I would say that. So what is the cost benefit ratio? It really depends on your cultural beliefs and the kind of value systems you place on it. In some parts of India, monkeys are not particularly valued, and therefore people will think nothing of poisoning them. In some parts of India, they're extremely valued, both for religious reasons and for the fact that simply culturally they think that this is a living creature, you can't harm it. In those places, they have great inhibition against harming them personally. We also learned through our studies that people in India do enjoy living with animals, generally speaking, observe them, and they take great delight in them. They particularly identify with monkeys simply because monkeys seem to have a social system that we can easily understand, right? There are long periods of independency. You see a group of animals, you can make out that there is this mother, is this child, etc. And because of that, they derive a great amount of pleasure out of it. And there is a certain ecological comfort this offers. So if you want me to talk or rather characterize what these are, it's difficult. They do value them for their sentience, the ability to feel pain or feelings like we do. They so value them for religious reasons, and all this has certain benefits in the sense it engenders a feeling of affection for the species. Once that feeling is there, then they will tolerate a great many things. Balanced against this, what kind of tangible cost do you suffer from? And that is financial, which is a big factor. There is also occasionally some kind of physical injury or harm that other can have. And within this, we are not even talking about the dangers of zoonotic transmission, which is a very real business, but typical people, at least lay people or farmers, don't take that into account. Occasionally they talk about bites or other kinds of physical injuries they have, but the financial is a big part. So it really depends on communities, the kind of region and kind of species as well. Some species engenders great feelings of warmth towards a species. Some other species don't. It's very difficult.
Here I would like you to elaborate on which primates we love, which primates do we hate, very simply.
It's a very sad state of affairs, but generally most people don't care much for the rhesus macaque. The rhesus macaque is quite a pugnacious, sturdy fellow. I admire him tremendously, I just mean that in a very general sense. I think it's a fantastic creature. I mean, it's so adaptable, it's at its range, it gets on with everything. There is just so much grit there, but I think the very
rabies.
very similar in sort of adaptability and even in appearance and stuff is the bonnet macaque. And typically people are much more fonder of the bonnet macaque. I can see why people would like the Hanuman langur better. The Hanuman langur is a gracious creature. The way it sits, the way it interacts with you. There is
also
kind
Hanuman
of
is attached to the
so
name.
this is what it is, right? So people will immediately attach sacredness to the Hanuman langur, the grey langur, but they don't really attach it much to the rhesus. But Krishnan had a lovely piece where he actually argued that the Hanuman was actually the rhesus macaque. That's a lovely piece, by the way. It's just that primates have their own personalities, and the way they interact with people also is part of the feedback mechanism that shapes how people react to them as well. We don't react the same way to all species. We do react definitely differently. It is very telling that we asked questions about why they, when we asked people about why they feed macaques, practically all of them responded they feed rhesus because they're afraid of rhesus. The rhesus is aggressive in its dinner, it demands something back. They feed bonnets because they felt sorry for bonnets. And they feed the langur because the langur is gone. Look at it, behaves so well, and which is true. Langur will sit there very graciously. The rhesus will try to threaten you.
And I also wonder if the relationship changes depending on how common an animal is.
Absolutely.
Like gibbons, which are not as common, will have the exotic status attached to them.
Indeed, I am very sure of that. And this difference is actually, that's a very old Chinese poem which talks of the princeling macaque, and it's actually a delightful poem that talks about the rambunctious macaque, which is not very elegant, whereas the gibbon is such an elegant princeling. Oh, it's a lovely poem. So I then realized when I read that oh, right, it goes quite across a few nations. People have these, these differences right across.
Yeah. So, as a closing note, what message would you have for our fellow human beings to live peacefully with primates?
Take responsibility for your actions. If you provision animals and then they come to you demand food, it's your responsibility. I think we need to be compassionate, but we also need to understand that the kind of compassion we are forcing on animals is not what they really require. We force food on them in the name of compassion, and why I would always want to, promote and save and treasure that compassion. I also think people should be a little more aware of the fact that wild animals don't need to be fed by us, keep your surroundings clean, don't put out food waste, and then you will see that animal behavior will respond to that and will leave you alone. Don't put out your hand and then say, why bite me? I didn't want your hand there. Keep it to yourself.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.